If you drove a car in America during the 1970s, chances are you sat behind the wheel of at least one of the cars in this video. Or at the very least, you stood in a parking lot watching somebody try to start one, and it just wouldn't turn over. The 1970s were the decade when the American auto industry fell apart. The 1973 oil embargo sent gas prices through the roof. Emissions regulations strangled engine power. New crash standards bolted ugly, oversized bumpers onto every car on the lot. And while Detroit was scrambling, Toyota and Datsun quietly rolled in with smaller, better-built cars that ran circles around the domestic competition. People called this period the Malaise Era, and that name was well earned. These are the 8 worst cars of that decade. Each one failed in its own unique way. One rusted through after 2 winters. Another locked its own owner out. And 2 of them actually won Motor Trend's Car of the Year before turning into full-blown disasters. 1970 to 1978, AMC Gremlin. On April 1st, 1970, April Fool's Day, American Motors unveiled a brand new car called the Gremlin, and it looked every bit like a joke. The Gremlin was AMC's answer to the small car crisis. But AMC didn't have the money to design something from scratch, so they took the Hornet, chopped the tail off, shortened the wheelbase from 108 inches down to 96 inches, and called it an all-new model. Design chief Dick Teague reportedly sketched the first draft on an airsickness bag during a Northwest Orient flight. One look at the finished product, and you'd have no trouble believing that story. The front half looked like a normal sedan, but from the rear door back, the car just stopped, like somebody took a chainsaw to it. The roofline dropped off sharply and ended with a rear window that was practically vertical. Here's the thing though, the Gremlin sold. A starting price under $2,000 made it one of the cheapest cars in America. For younger buyers, especially the under 35 crowd that made up 60% of first-year sales, ugly didn't matter if the price was right. AMC moved a total of 671,475 Gremlins over 8 years of production. The Gremlin was ugly, everybody knew it, but at least it didn't rust until the wheels fell off, and it didn't catch fire when you got rear-ended. 1971 to 1977, Chevrolet Vega. Motor Trend handed Chevrolet Vega its Car of the Year award for 1971, and General Motors believed they'd finally built a weapon that could beat Toyota and Datsun on American soil. A dedicated team of 50 engineers designed the car from scratch. The big technical breakthrough was a 140 cubic inch engine block cast in aluminum alloy, significantly lighter than traditional iron, promising better fuel economy for the age of oil embargoes. The cylinder head, however, was cast iron. When the engine heated up, the aluminum and iron expanded at different rates. The head gasket warped, coolant leaked into the combustion chambers, and the engine started destroying itself from the inside out. Plenty of Vegas were blowing white smoke, with barely a few tens of thousands of miles on the odometer. By 1972, 6 out of every 7 Vegas that rolled off the line had already received a recall notice. The body was just as bad. Rust spread so fast it became a running joke in the northern states. 2 winters of road salt were enough to eat through the fenders and floor pans. People joked that the Vega started rusting on the assembly line in Lordstown, Ohio, before it even left the factory. GM built close to 2 million Vegas before killing the nameplate after the 1977 model year. Close to 2 million American families paid good money for a car whose engine cooked itself and whose body dissolved after 2 winters. 1975 to 1980 AMC Pacer. AMC showed up again, and this time they brought a round, bloated, glass-covered thing that looked like a giant fishbowl on 4 wheels. Car and driver called it the Flying Fishbowl in their May 1976 issue, and that nickname stuck for decades. The Pacer launched in 1975 with genuinely ambitious engineering behind it. The entire car was designed around a Wankel rotary engine that GM was developing and had promised to supply to AMC. The rotary was compact and light, which allowed for a short nose and an unusually wide cabin. Roughly 37% of the exterior surface was glass, creating an airy interior for a subcompact. Then GM killed the Wankel program in 1974 over durability concerns, fuel consumption, and emissions. AMC was left stranded with a nearly finished car and no engine to put in it. The only option was to cram the inline-6, 232 and 258 cubic inches into an engine bay designed for something much smaller. The result was a subcompact that weighed nearly 3,200 pounds, heavier than some mid-size cars of the era, with fuel economy that was embarrassing in the middle of an oil crisis. One detail most people don't know: the passenger side door was about 4 inches longer than the driver's door, so rear passengers could get in and out more easily from the curbside. AMC sold around 280,000 Pacers over 5 years before quietly pulling the plug in 1980. 1975 to 1981. Triumph TR7. The first 4 were all American cars, so now we cross the Atlantic for a moment. The Triumph TR7 was a British sports car from the British Leyland Group, and it came with a big promise: the shape of things to come. Harrisman's wedge design really did look striking when it hit American showrooms in January 1975. The nose sloped down at a sharp angle, a strong character line ran along the body, and the overall shape suggested a scaled-down supercar. In the advertisements, the TR7 looked great. Then Americans started taking delivery and found out the truth. The TR7 was assembled at the Speak factory in Liverpool, a plant with some of the worst build quality in the entire European auto industry at the time. Workers at Speak went on strike constantly, and the TR7s coming off the line were riddled with problems, from rainwater leaking into the cabin to flickering electrics to body panels visibly misaligned. Road and Track's owner survey ranked the TR7 among the worst quality cars they had ever recorded. The Speak plant shut down in May 1978, and production moved to Canley and eventually Solihull, where quality did improve somewhat in later years. But by then, the reputation was already ruined. Around 112,000 TR7 coupes and nearly 29,000 convertibles were built, most of them shipped to America. The shape of things to come turned out to be the shape of disappointment. 1974 to 1976, Bricklin SV1. Malcolm Bricklin was an American entrepreneur with big vision and execution that never quite kept up. Before getting into car manufacturing, he'd brought Subaru to the American market and made a fortune doing it. Then, he decided to build his own car, something he called the SV1, short for Safety Vehicle 1. The concept sounded compelling. A 2-seat sports car with gull-wing doors, a composite body resistant to dents, integrated bumpers that absorbed impacts at 5 miles per hour, and no ashtray or cigarette lighter because Bricklin believed smoking while driving was unsafe. The car was assembled in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, funded partly by the provincial government. Production was chaotic from day one. The composite body panels warped and didn't fit the frame properly. Paint peeled. The hydraulic gull-wing doors weighed close to 100 pounds each, and the mechanism failed so often that some owners found themselves locked outside their own car because the doors wouldn't open. The 1974 models used an AMC 360 V8. The 1975s switched to a Ford 351 Windsor, and both suffered from overheating because the engine bay had poor ventilation. Only 2,854 SV1s were built before the company went bankrupt. The New Brunswick government lost approximately 23 million Canadian dollars in investment, triggering a political scandal that dragged on for years. Malcolm Bricklin moved on to his next venture as if nothing had happened, and he later tried to bring Yugo to America, but that's a whole other story. 1977 to 1980, Lincoln Versailles. In the mid-1970s, Cadillac launched the Seville, and it sold so well that Ford panicked. The Seville was Cadillac's first compact luxury sedan, more refined and more fuel-efficient than the traditional land yachts, and it was exactly what buyers wanted in the middle of an oil crisis. Ford needed an answer from Lincoln, and they needed it fast. That answer was the Lincoln Versailles, which arrived in mid-1977. Underneath, it was a Ford Granada wearing a Lincoln grille, leather interior, and a starting price of $11,500, making it the most expensive Lincoln sedan at the time. Ford didn't exactly hide the Granada origins, but they hoped buyers wouldn't notice. Buyers noticed. Anyone who looked under the car, popped the hood, or simply sat inside and went for a test drive could tell immediately that this was a Granada at twice the price. The suspension still shook like a Granada, the sound insulation was thin enough that you could hear every bump in the road, and the driving experience felt no different from a $5,000 car. Even Lincoln dealers were reluctant to sell it because they worried about damaging the brand. Over 4 years of production, Lincoln moved only about 50,000 Versailles. During that same period, Cadillac sold roughly 4 times as many Sevilles. Slapping a Lincoln badge on a Ford Granada and charging double for it, turns out buyers weren't that gullible. 1976 to 1980, Dodge Aspen. Remember I mentioned at the beginning that 2 cars on this list won Car of the Year. Chevrolet Vega was the first. Dodge Aspen is the second. The Aspen and its twin, the Plymouth Volare, launched in the fall of 1975 as 1976 models, replacing the aging Dart and Valiant. Motor Trend was so impressed they gave the pair their Car of the Year award. The cars looked good, the sizing was right, and on paper they represented a major step forward over the previous generation. Then customers started driving them home, and things fell apart in the most literal sense. Front fenders rusted after a single winter. The car stalled in traffic because of carburetor defects. The ignition system malfunctioned. Brakes had issues. The front suspension came loose. Lee Iacocca later admitted that the Aspen and Volare were rushed to market too soon, turning first-year buyers into the final round of test subjects. NHTSA issued at least 5 mandatory recalls on the 1976 and 1977 models, covering the suspension, ignition, fuel system, brakes, and steering. Chrysler also had to voluntarily recall every single 1976 and 1977 model for front fender replacement with galvanized steel, a recall that cost them $109 million they could barely afford. The Aspen and Volare became the most recalled vehicles in American automotive history at the time, until GM's X-Cars took that title a few years later. The financial damage from the Aspen and Volare helped push Chrysler to the brink of bankruptcy and the federal bailout of 1979. 1971 to 1980, Ford Pinto. Every other car in this video no matter how bad, only ever cost you repair bills or embarrassment in a parking lot. The Ford Pinto was on a completely different level because this car was linked to deaths that should never have happened. Lee Iacocca wanted a subcompact under £2,000 at a price under $2,000, and he pushed his team to get it to market in 25 months, nearly a year faster than normal development. Ford pulled it off. The Pinto debuted in 1971 and sold briskly right away. Over 3.1 million were built before production ended in 1980. The problem was the fuel tank. It sat directly behind the rear axle, between the axle and the rear bumper, with no protective shielding whatsoever. In a moderate-speed rear-end collision, the tank got shoved into bolts protruding from the differential, punctured, and gasoline spilled out. The car could be engulfed in flames within seconds. Official NHTSA data recorded 27 deaths linked to Pinto fuel tank fires between 1971 and 1977, though some other sources estimate the number was considerably higher. The most famous case was Grimshaw versus Ford in 1978. The driver, Lily Gray, died. The passenger, 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw, suffered severe burns over most of his body. The jury awarded $125 million in punitive damages, calculated based on Ford's profits from the Pinto line, later reduced by the court to $3.5 million. Internal Ford documents revealed that reinforcing the fuel tank would have cost only about $11 per car, but Ford calculated that paying out lawsuits would be cheaper than a full recall. When those documents went public, the outrage was nationwide. In June 1978, Ford recalled 1.5 million Pintos along with 30,000 Mercury Bobcats. Ford then became the first American corporation ever criminally prosecuted for a product defect, though the jury ultimately returned a not guilty verdict. The irony is that many of the cars on this list are now sought after by collectors. The AMC Gremlin, the AMC Pacer, even the Bricklin SV1, they've all become cultural icons of the 1970s in ways nobody predicted when they were new. And those failures also forced real change. The Pinto scandal led to stricter fuel tank safety standards. The Aspen and Volare recalls forced Chrysler to rebuild its quality control process from the ground up. So which one do you think was worse, the Ford Pinto or the Chevrolet Vega? And did your family ever own any of these 8 cars? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear your story. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.